The rope burned against Garrett Webb's wrists as two deputies dragged him through the courthouse doors. Outside, the entire town of Timber Ridge had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and contempt. He'd been caught stealing 3 horses from the judge's own stable, a crime that usually ended with a noose. But Judge Vernon Ashford had something else in mind, something worse than hanging, something that would bind Garrett to this valley forever, whether he wanted it or not. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The floorboards of the Timber Ridge courthouse groaned under the weight of 100 spectators. Sawdust clung to Garrett Webb's boots, mixing with the smell of pine tar and unwashed bodies packed too close together. He stood in the center of the room, hands bound, his shirt torn at the shoulder from where he'd fought the deputies 3 miles back. Blood had dried on his knuckles. His hat was gone, lost somewhere in the scuffle, leaving his sun-darkened face exposed to every staring eye. Judge Vernon Ashford sat behind the bench like a king on a throne, his silver hair perfectly combed, his black suit pressed without a single wrinkle. The man had built half this town with timber money before deciding the law was a more respectable way to control people's lives. Now he controlled both the land and the verdicts. Garrett had known this moment would come eventually. You couldn't drift through the Montana Territory, stealing what you needed, without someone finally catching up to you. He'd been running since he was 16, since the drought killed his family's cattle and the bank took their land. 7 years of sleeping under stars, working odd jobs, taking what wasn't his when desperation called. He wasn't proud of it. But pride didn't fill an empty stomach or keep you warm through mountain winters. The judge's gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Garrett Andrew Webb, Ashford's voice rolled through the room like distant thunder. You stand accused of horse theft, trespassing on private property, and resisting arrest. 3 capital offenses in the Montana Territory. How do you plead? Garrett lifted his chin, meeting the judge's cold blue eyes. Guilty on all counts. A ripple of surprise moved through the spectators. Most men in his position would beg, make excuses, claim mistaken identity. Garrett had learned long ago that lies only made things worse. Judge Ashford's mouth twitched, something between a smile and a sneer. At least you're honest about your crimes. That's more than most thieves manage. He leaned forward, fingers steepled on the bench. The penalty for horse theft is death by hanging. However, I am not without mercy. Garrett's jaw tightened. He'd heard that tone before from men who called themselves merciful while doing cruel things. There was always a catch. You're young, the judge continued. Strong. You could be useful to this community if properly directed. Therefore, I'm prepared to offer you an alternative to the gallows. The crowd stirred again, whispers rising like wind through grass. Garrett remained still, waiting for the trap to close. My daughter, Catherine, is 22 years old. She has received the finest education available in Boston. She speaks 3 languages, plays piano, and has been raised to be the wife of a respected man. Ashford's voice hardened. Unfortunately, she has refused every suitable match I've arranged. She claims she wants to choose her own husband, based on some romantic notion she learned from novels. Garrett's stomach dropped. He knew where this was going now, and it was worse than any noose. You will marry my daughter today, Judge Ashford declared, his voice ringing through the courthouse. You will work my land, manage my livestock, and prove yourself a productive member of this community. In 5 years, if you have fulfilled these obligations without incident, you will receive a full pardon and ownership of the Northern Valley property. 200 acres, the words hit like stones. Marriage, 5 years. Ownership of land he'd never be able to afford otherwise. It should have sounded like salvation, but Garrett heard only the prison door slamming shut. And if I refuse? His voice came out rougher than intended. Judge Ashford's smile was as cold as January. Then you hang at dawn. Your choice is simple, Mr. Webb, life or death. Garrett's mind raced. He'd spent 7 years avoiding exactly this kind of trap, the kind that tied a man down, took away his freedom, made him answerable to someone else's rules. He'd watched his father break under the weight of debt and duty, seen his mother fade when the land she loved was taken. He'd sworn he'd never let himself be owned by anyone, but he also wasn't ready to die. Not at 23. Not when he could still feel the sun on his face and taste the wind coming down from the mountains. "I need to think about it," he said. "You have until I count to 10. The judge picked up his gavel. 1. The crowd held its breath. Garrett looked around the room, seeing the eager faces, the judgmental stares, the few who looked away in pity. These people wanted a show. They wanted to see the wild drifter finally broken. 2. His hands clenched inside the ropes. There had to be another way, some way to escape, to run, to disappear into the wilderness like he'd done before. 3. But the deputies stood at every door, hands on their guns. Even if he broke free, where would he go? They'd hunt him down like a dog. And this time they wouldn't bother with a trial. 4. The Northern Valley. 200 acres. His father had dreamed of land like that before the drought came. Rich grass, water from mountain streams, timber and game. A man could build something real there, if he was willing to pay the price. 5. But marriage meant staying. It meant roots. It meant answering to a woman he'd never met, living under the judge's thumb, becoming the kind of settled man he'd always despised. 6. His mother's face flashed through his mind. The way she'd looked in those final months, grey and thin, her hands still trying to plant seeds in dust that wouldn't grow anything. She'd made him promise something before she died. "Promise me you'll survive, Garrett. Whatever it takes." 7. He closed his eyes, saw the open road, felt the freedom of riding with no destination, no obligations, nothing but himself and the horizon. That life had been hard, often hungry, sometimes dangerous. But it had been his. 8. This wouldn't be his life. It would be the judge's life, the daughter's life, everyone's life but his own. 9. The gavel started to rise. Wait. The word tore out of him like something dying. "I'll do it." Judge Ashford lowered the gavel slowly, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "A wise choice, Mr. Webb. Deputies, remove his bonds." The ropes fell away, leaving red marks on Garrett's wrists. He rubbed them absently, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He'd just traded a quick death for a slow one. 5 years might as well be forever. "Bring in Catherine," the judge ordered. A door at the side of the courtroom opened. Garrett turned, expecting to see some pampered city girl in silk and lace. Probably horrified at being forced to marry a horse thief. What he saw instead stopped his breath. She walked in like she was entering a battlefield, not a wedding. Her dress was deep green, simple compared to what the other town women wore, with none of the frills and ribbons that usually decorated rich girls. Dark auburn hair pulled back in a braid that fell past her shoulders. She was tall, almost meeting his eyes, when she stopped 3 feet away. But it was her expression that caught him. No tears, no fear. Just cold, furious defiance burning in hazel eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Catherine Ashford looked at him the way she might. Look at a rattlesnake that had crawled into her. Bedroom, dangerous, unwanted, something to be dealt with. Then she turned that same look on her father. "This is your solution?" Her voice carried clearly through the silent room, educated but with steel underneath. "You couldn't control me, so you found the first criminal you could force me to marry." "Catherine," the judge's voice held warning, "you will show respect." "Respect?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're selling me to a horse thief to punish us both. Where's the respect in that, father?" Garrett found himself almost admiring her courage, standing up to the judge in front of the whole town. Most people, including him, had learned to just take what Ashford dished out and keep their mouths shut. "You refused every proper suitor," the judge said, his face reddening. "You insisted on choosing your own husband. Very well, here he is. Your choice, or rather, your consequence." Catherine's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she said nothing more. Garrett watched her jaw work, saw the way she held herself rigid, fighting for control. He recognized that fight. He'd done it himself often enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The preacher stepped forward, a nervous little man named Collier, who'd clearly been waiting in the wings. He opened his Bible with shaking hands and began to read the marriage ceremony in a voice that trembled on every third word. No one was listening. The entire room watched Catherine and Garrett, waiting to see if either would bolt. Garrett considered it. The doors weren't that far. He was fast, always had been. But the deputies still had their hands on their weapons, and he'd already made his choice. 5 years, 200 acres, survival. When Preacher Collier reached the vows, Garrett spoke them in a flat voice, the words meaning nothing. Catherine said hers through clenched teeth, each syllable forced out like pulling nails. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Collier squeaked, snapping the Bible shut like he couldn't escape fast enough. No one said, "You may kiss the bride." The idea seemed absurd under the circumstances. Judge Ashford stood, pulling a folded document from his coat. "These are the terms of your arrangement. You will live at the Ashford Ranch in the foreman's cabin. Garrett will manage the livestock and maintain the property. Catherine will oversee the household accounts and maintain proper appearances. You will present yourselves as a married couple in all public settings. Any attempt to leave, any failure to fulfill these obligations, and Garrett will be immediately arrested and hanged. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Catherine said coldly. Garrett just nodded. What else was there to say? "Good. Marshal Hewitt will check on you weekly for the first year to ensure compliance. After that, monthly visits." The judge's smile was thin and satisfied. "Welcome to the family, Mr. Webb. I trust you will prove yourself worthy of this second chance." The gavel came down one final time, and it was done. Garrett Webb, drifter and horse thief, was now a married man, bound to a woman who hated him, owned by a judge who saw him as property, trapped in a valley he couldn't leave. Catherine turned and walked out of the courthouse without looking at him. Garrett followed, the crowd parting around them like they carried plague. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright, too cheerful for what had just happened. A wagon waited, already loaded with what he assumed were Catherine's belongings. His own possessions amounted to a bedroll and saddlebag the deputies had confiscated, now tossed in the wagon bed like garbage. Catherine climbed up to the driver's seat and took the reins before he could offer to help. Not that she looked like she wanted his help. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, waiting. Garrett pulled himself up beside her, keeping distance between them. The leather seat creaked under his weight. Without a word, Catherine snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, pulling them away from town, toward the Ashford Ranch and whatever came next. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They were strangers bound by force, two people who'd been given no choice, both prisoners in different ways. The road wound through pine forests and open meadows, following the creek that fed the valley. It should have been beautiful. Garrett had always loved this kind of country, wild and green, full of life. But now it felt like walls closing in, the trees marking the boundaries of his new cage. After an hour, Catherine finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but hard as stone. "I want you to understand something. I didn't want this any more than you did. My father is a tyrant who can't stand being defied. This is his way of punishing us both." Garrett kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Figured that much out. I won't pretend to like you. I won't pretend this is anything but what it is. A prison sentence for both of us." She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "But I also won't make it worse than it has to be. We'll do what's required to keep you alive and maintain appearances. Beyond that, we stay out of each other's way." He nodded slowly. "That works for me." "Good." She turned back to the road. "The foreman's cabin is separate from the main house. You'll have your space. I'll have mine. We only have to play this role when people are watching." It should have been a relief, but somehow it made everything feel even more hollow. 5 years of pretending, 5 years of living half a life. But it was still better than hanging. The ranch came into view as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks. It was larger than Garrett expected, sprawling across the valley floor. The main house stood 2 stories tall, painted white with dark green shutters, a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses, storage buildings. This wasn't just a ranch. It was an empire. And somewhere in all that wealth and land, he and Catherine would pretend to build a life together, while both counting the days until they could be free. The foreman's cabin sat at the edge of the property, nestled between a grove of aspen trees and the horse pasture. It was small but solid, built from logs that had weathered to silver grey. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a covered porch stretched across the front. Catherine brought the wagon to a stop, setting the brake with more force than necessary. Garrett jumped down and studied the place that would be his home for the next 5 years. 1 room, maybe 2. A far cry from sleeping under stars, but better than a jail cell. The windows were dark, the door slightly crooked on its hinges. No one had lived here in months, maybe longer. The previous foreman drank himself to death last winter, Catherine said, climbing down from the other side. She didn't wait for him to help. My father didn't bother replacing him. Just let the ranch hands manage themselves until now. She walked to the back of the wagon and started pulling at a trunk. Garrett moved to help, but she'd already dragged it to the edge. Together, in awkward silence, they unloaded her belongings. 3 trunks, 2 wooden crates, a carpet bag, and several bundles wrapped in canvas. Not excessive for a woman of her status, but far more than Garrett had owned in his entire life. His own possessions still sat in a heap. A bedroll with patches sewn over holes, a saddlebag containing an extra shirt, sewing kit, tin cup, and the small knife his father had given him before the drought. Everything he'd managed to keep through 7 years of drifting. Catherine surveyed the pile without comment, but something flickered across her face. Pity, maybe, or recognition of just how different their worlds had been until this morning. The cabin door stuck when Garrett pushed it, wood swollen from mountain moisture. He put his shoulder into it, and it gave with a screech of protest. Dust hung thick in the air inside, visible in the shaft of light from the doorway. One main room with a pot-bellied stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed pushed against the far wall, and shelves that held nothing but mouse droppings and cobwebs. A doorway led to what looked like a small storage room in the back. It's not much, Catherine said from behind him. She'd stopped at the threshold, as if crossing it would make everything too real. I've slept in worse. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. I'm sure you have. The judgment in her voice rankled, but Garrett swallowed his response. She was right after all. He was a thief, a drifter, someone who'd taken the easy way instead of building something honest. The fact that circumstances had driven him to it didn't change what he'd done. He walked to the window and wiped a clear spot in the grime. Through it, he could see the main house in the distance, white and imposing against the darkening sky. Smoke rose from its chimney. Lamplight glowed in several windows. That was where Catherine belonged, in comfort and warmth, not in this forgotten cabin with a man she'd been forced to marry. You should go back to the house, he said without turning. No point in both of us suffering through cleaning this place. The entire ranch is watching, Catherine replied coolly. The hands, the cook, the housemaid. Everyone will know by tomorrow what happened in town today. If I leave you here alone on our wedding night, it will raise questions. Wedding night. The words hung in the dusty air like a death sentence. Garrett turned to find her standing straighter, chin lifted, that same defiant look she'd worn in the courthouse. I don't expect anything from you, he said carefully. Your father made us say vows, but that doesn't mean I know what it doesn't mean. She cut him off. But appearances matter. The judge made that clear. We present ourselves as a proper married couple, or you hang. That means I will sleep here tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night after, until we've figured out how to make this arrangement work. Garrett's chest tightened. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller. There's only one bed. I can see that. Catherine moved past him to the bed, eyeing it with obvious distaste. I'll take the bed. You can have the floor. Under different circumstances, his mother would have slapped him for letting a woman sleep on the floor while he took the bed. But these weren't normal circumstances, and he was too tired to argue about the principle of the thing. Fine. They worked in silence as the sun dropped below the mountains. Garrett swept years of accumulated dirt and debris out the door, while Catherine attacked the shelves and table with a rag she'd dampened from the pump outside. She moved with practiced efficiency, someone who'd learned how to work despite growing up with servants. That surprised him. Most rich women he'd encountered wouldn't touch a broom if their lives depended on it. When the worst of the filth was cleared, Garrett coaxed the stove back to life with a kindling he found in a box on the porch. The chimney drew properly, pulling smoke up and out. Small mercy. At least they wouldn't freeze tonight. Catherine had unpacked one of her trunks, pulling out quilts and linens that looked impossibly clean in this rough space. She made up the bed with quick, precise movements, tucking corners the way someone had obviously taught her. When she finished, the narrow cot looked almost civilized, a small island of order in the chaos. "There's no food here," she said, surveying the empty shelves. "We'll need to eat at the main house until we can stock supplies." "I'm not hungry, neither am I." She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally showing through her rigid posture. "But we still have to go. The hands eat in the bunkhouse at 7. My father expects us to join him for dinner at 8. Garrett checked his battered watch. 7:15. Not enough time to avoid it, not enough time to prepare himself for sitting at Judge Ashford's table, pretending everything was normal. Catherine must have seen something in his face because she sighed. "I don't want to go either, but if we don't show up, he'll send Marshal Hewitt here with questions. Or worse, he'll decide you're already violating the terms." She was right. The judge would be watching for any excuse to declare the arrangement void and see Garrett swing. One meal. He could survive one meal. "Give me 5 minutes to wash up." The pump outside sputtered and coughed before producing water so cold it made his teeth ache. Garrett scrubbed his face and hands, trying to make himself presentable. He had no clean clothes, nothing appropriate for dining with the judge. His shirt was torn, his pants stained with trail dust and grass. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd been dragged off the road and forced into a life he hadn't chosen. When he came back inside, Catherine had changed into a different dress, this one deep blue with black buttons down the front. She'd redone her braid and washed her face. She looked composed, unreadable, every inch the judge's daughter. "Ready?" she asked. "No." "Good, neither am I." They walked to the main house at twilight, neither speaking. Crickets sang in the grass. Somewhere a horse whinnied in the pasture. The air smelled of pine and approaching rain. It should have been peaceful, but tension crackled between them, like lightning about to strike. The main house was even more impressive up close. Carved woodwork around the door, stained glass in the windows, a brass knocker shaped like an eagle. Catherine didn't knock. She opened the door and walked in like she owned the place, which technically she would someday. Inside was a different world. Polished wood floors, Persian rugs, oil paintings on the walls. A crystal chandelier hung in the entryway, catching lamplight and throwing rainbows across the ceiling. Garrett had never been in a house like this. It made him acutely aware of his dirty boots, his rough hands, the way he didn't belong. Catherine, Mr. Webb. A woman appeared from a doorway to the left, middle-aged with grey streaking her dark hair, wearing a simple black dress and white apron. The housekeeper, Garrett guessed. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes missed nothing. "Dinner will be served in the dining room. The judge is waiting." "Thank you, Mrs. Palmer." Catherine's voice shifted, becoming more formal, more distant. The performance had begun. They followed Mrs. Palmer through a parlor and into a dining room dominated by a table that could seat 20. Judge Ashford sat at the head, a glass of whiskey already in his hand. He'd changed into a dinner jacket, looking every bit the wealthy rancher playing at being civilized. Ah, the newlyweds. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Please sit." Catherine took a seat on the judge's right. Garrett hesitated before taking the chair across from her, as far from the judge as possible, while still being at the table. The wood felt too smooth under his hands. The chair was too delicate for his weight. Mrs. Palmer and a younger woman Garrett didn't recognize brought out the meal. Roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. More food than Garrett had seen in months. His stomach twisted with hunger, but he couldn't bring himself to reach for anything. "Don't be shy, Mr. Webb. the judge said, carving into his chicken. "Your family now. Such as it is." The words carried weight and warning. Family, but not equal. Family, but only as long as he obeyed. Garrett filled his plate with small portions, hyper-aware of every movement he made. Catherine ate mechanically, her face blank, barely tasting the food. The judge made conversation like nothing unusual had happened, talking about cattle prices and timber contracts and political appointments in the territorial capital. Neither Catherine nor Garrett responded beyond necessary murmurs. The whole thing felt like a play, where everyone knew their lines, but no one believed the story. "I expect you'll start work at dawn, Mr. Webb," the judge said, setting down his fork. "The cattle need to be moved to the upper pasture. The fences on the south boundary need repair, and the barn roof has been leaking since the spring rains. Marcus, the head ranch hand, will show you what needs doing." "Yes, sir. You'll address me as Judge Ashford or Judge, not sir." "You're married to my daughter, not enlisted in my army." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Yes, Judge Ashford." "Good." The judge turned to Catherine. "And you, daughter, will manage the household accounts as we discussed. Mrs. Palmer will provide the ledgers. You'll report to me weekly on expenditures." Catherine nodded once, saying nothing. The meal dragged on until Garrett wanted to bolt from the room just to breathe air that didn't taste like obligation. Finally, mercifully, the judge pushed back from the table and stood. "Well, I'm sure you're both eager to return to your new home." His smile was cruel. "Congratulations on your marriage. I trust it will be everything you both deserve." Catherine rose without a word and walked toward the door. Garrett followed, feeling the judge's eyes on his back until they were outside and the door closed behind them. The night air hit like cold water. Catherine walked fast, her skirts swishing against the grass. Garrett caught up to her halfway back to the cabin. "Your father is—" "Don't!" She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. In the moonlight, her expression was fierce. "Don't say anything about my father. I know exactly what he is. I've known my entire life. Then why didn't you just marry one of the men he wanted? Would have been easier than this." Her laugh was bitter. "Easier for who?" "Those men were his business partners, his political allies. He wasn't arranging marriages. He was arranging mergers. I would have been property, passed from one man's ownership to another's. And this is different how?" The words came out harsher than Garrett intended. Catherine's eyes flashed. "It's not. That's exactly the point. He wanted to punish me for refusing to be sold, so he gave me to someone even lower than the men I rejected. A horse thief, nobody. His way of showing me what defiance costs. The truth of it stung, even though Garrett had already known. He was the punishment. The worst option. The thing meant to break her spirit. And what about me?" he asked quietly. "I'm stuck here just like you. 5 years of playing house with someone who looks at me like I'm dirt under her shoes. You chose to be here." Catherine shot back. "You could have chosen the rope instead. That's not a choice. That's dying or living." "Then live." Her voice dropped, losing some of its edge. "We both chose to live, even if living means this. So we make the best of it. We follow the rules, we maintain appearances, and we count the days until it's over." She turned and continued toward the cabin. Garrett watched her go, silhouetted against the lamplight coming from the bunkhouse beyond. She was right, of course. They'd both made their choices. Now they had to survive the consequences. Inside the cabin, Catherine moved mechanically, preparing for sleep. She unpinned her hair and let it fall, brushed it with quick strokes, changed behind a blanket she'd strung across one corner for privacy. When she emerged in a simple nightgown, she looked younger, less armored, almost vulnerable. She climbed into the narrow bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin. Turning her face to the wall, Garrett laid out his bedroll on the floor near the stove. The ground was hard beneath the thin canvas, but he'd slept on worse. Much worse. At least here he was, dry, warm, alive. "Garrett," Catherine's voice came softly from the darkness. "Yeah? I'm sorry. For what my father did to you. For what he's still doing to both of us." He didn't know what to say to that. "Sorry it didn't change anything. It didn't unlock the cage or give back the freedom he'd lost. Get some sleep, Catherine." She didn't respond, but he heard her breathing slow and even out. Exhaustion claiming her despite everything, Garrett lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling beams, feeling the weight of 5 years pressing down on his chest. Outside, an owl called. The wind picked up, rattling the window glass. Tomorrow he would start work as the judge's foreman, doing exactly what he was told, living exactly as he was ordered. But tonight, in the darkness, he let himself imagine escape, running, disappearing into the mountains and never looking back. The fantasy was sweet and useless because somewhere on the other side of the room, Catherine Ashford was trapped just like him. And despite everything, despite the anger and resentment and fear, he couldn't quite make himself abandon her to face the judge's wrath alone. They were both prisoners now. And prisoners, whether they liked it or not, had to watch each other's backs if they wanted to survive. Dawn came cold and grey, mist rising from the valley floor like ghosts. Garrett woke to the sound of roosters and the distant clang of the breakfast bell from the bunkhouse. His back ached from sleeping on the hard floor, muscles stiff from yesterday's fight with the deputies. He sat up carefully, rolling his shoulders to work out the knots. Catherine still slept, curled on her side facing the wall, her breathing deep and even. In sleep, the tension left her face, making her look less like the judge's fierce daughter and more like someone who'd simply had too much taken from her too fast. Garrett dressed quietly and slipped outside without waking her. The morning air bit at his skin, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke. Ranch hands moved between buildings, preparing for the day's work. A few glanced his way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt. Word had spread fast. Marcus Finch, the head ranch hand, waited by the corral. He was older than Garrett by maybe 15 years, with weathered skin and grey threading his dark beard. His eyes held the kind of judgment that came from working honest jobs all your life and looking down on anyone who hadn't. "You're the new foreman," Marcus said. "Not a question. Seems like it, because you married Miss Catherine, not because you earned it." Garrett met his gaze steadily. "That's right." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Maybe respect for not making excuses, or maybe just acknowledgement that at least Garrett knew his place. "Cattle need moving to the upper pasture today. The judge wants it done before the weather turns. You know how to work cattle? I've worked ranches before." "Good. You'll ride with me and the boys. We leave in 20 minutes. Get breakfast first if you want it." The bunkhouse dining hall smelled of coffee, bacon, and sourdough biscuits. 8 ranch hands sat at a long table, plates piled high, conversation dying the moment Garrett walked in. The cook, a heavy-set man with a scarred forearm, dropped a plate in front of an empty seat without meeting Garrett's eyes. He ate quickly, tasting nothing, aware of every sideways glance and whispered comment. These men had worked for Judge Ashford for years. They'd known Catherine since she was a child. Now here was a convicted horse thief sitting at their table, married to the boss's daughter, given authority he hadn't earned. A younger hand, barely 20 with red hair and too much confidence, finally spoke up.
"So how's married life treating you, Webb?"
"Miss Catherine, everything you dreamed of?" The others went quiet, waiting to see how Garrett would respond. He set down his fork and looked at the kid directly. "That's Mrs. Webb to you. And if you've got something to say about my wife, say it to my face, instead of acting like a coward behind questions." The red-haired hand flushed, his jaw working. For a moment it looked like he might swing. Then Marcus's voice cut through the tension. "Enough, Danny. We've got work to do. Save your energy for the cattle." The kid backed down, but the hostility remained thick in the air. Garrett finished his breakfast in silence and followed the hands outside, where horses stood, saddled and ready. Someone had prepared a bay gelding for him, older but steady-looking. Not the best horse in the string, but not the worst either. They rode out as the sun broke through the mist, 6 riders moving cattle from the lower valley toward the mountain pastures. The work was hard and familiar, the kind Garrett had done on a dozen different ranches over the years. He knew how to read cattle, how to position his horse, when to push and when to let the herd flow naturally. Marcus watched him work with a critical eye, but as the morning wore on, some of the suspicion eased. Whatever else Garrett was, he wasn't useless. He pulled his weight, moved cattle efficiently, and didn't complain when assigned the difficult positions. By midday, they'd moved 200, head up the steep trail to the upper pasture where late summer grass still grew thick. The hands stopped to rest and water the horses at a creek that ran cold and clear from snowmelt higher up. Danny and 2 others kept their distance from Garrett, but Marcus tossed him a canteen and sat on a nearby rock. "You've done this before," Marcus said. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. Worked cattle drives through Wyoming and Colorado. Hired on at ranches when I needed money. Never stayed long? Why not? Garrett took a long drink before answering. Didn't want to be tied down, and now you are. For 5 years, Marcus studied him. That must eat at you. Every minute, the older man nodded slowly. Miss Catherine's a good woman, smart, tougher than people give her credit for. She didn't deserve what the judge did to her. Neither did I. No, Marcus agreed. But you stole horses. She just wanted to make her own choices. Those aren't the same thing. Garrett had no answer for that. They were both prisoners, but Catherine's crime had been wanting freedom, while his had been taking it the wrong way. The distinction mattered. Even if the result was the same cage, they worked through the afternoon, checking fences and clearing deadfall from water sources. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sun hung low and red over the western peaks. Garrett's shoulders burned from hours in the saddle, his hands blistered from post-hole work. Good, honest exhaustion. The kind that came from earning your keep rather than taking what wasn't yours. Catherine sat on the cabin porch when he returned, account ledgers spread across a small table she'd dragged outside. She changed into a simpler dress, brown cotton with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pinned back loosely, and ink stained her right index finger. She looked up as he dismounted, her expression unreadable. "How was your first day?" she asked. "Long? Yours?" "The same. Mrs. Palmer gave me 5 years of household accounts to review. My father apparently hasn't checked them in months. There are discrepancies." Garrett unsaddled the bay and turned it into the corral before joining her on the porch. His legs protested sitting down, muscles threatening to cramp. He stretched them out, wincing. "What kind of discrepancies?" Catherine tapped the ledger with her pen. "Money allocated for supplies that were never purchased. Invoices from vendors who don't exist. Someone has been stealing from my father, and either he hasn't noticed or he doesn't care. Maybe both." She almost smiled. "Maybe, should I tell him?" "Do you want to?" Catherine considered the question, her gaze distant. "Part of me wants to let whoever it is keep stealing. Let his empire crumble from the inside while he's too busy controlling everyone's lives to notice. But that feels petty. Petty would be understandable given the circumstances." This time she smiled, small and bitter. "I'll think about it. For now, I'm just documenting everything." She closed the ledger and stood gathering the books. "There's stew on the stove. Mrs. Palmer sent it over. I think she feels sorry for us." Inside, the cabin smelled of beef and vegetables. Catherine had cleaned more since morning, organized her belongings, and made the space almost livable. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table, adding unexpected color to the rough interior. Small touches that transformed the place from a shelter into something closer to a home. They ate together at the small table, the silence between them less hostile than before. Shared exhaustion created a fragile truce. They were both too tired to maintain their walls completely. "Marcus seems like a good man," Garrett offered, trying to fill the quiet. "He is. He worked for my grandfather before the judge inherited the ranch. He's been here longer than I've been alive." Catherine paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "What did the other hand say about me?" "About us? Nothing worth repeating. That bad. They're protective of you. They see me as the criminal who somehow got elevated above his station. Can't say I blame them." Catherine set down her spoon, meeting his eyes across the table. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone cruel, angry, someone who'd take out his situation on me since he couldn't take it out on my father." She looked away. Most men would, I think. Garrett thought about the men he'd known over the years, the ones who used their fists when life didn't go their way. who blamed everyone else for their problems. His father had been like that toward the end, broken by loss, until he lashed out at everyone who loved him. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "Whatever else happens, whatever this becomes, I won't do that. Why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't, not yet. But maybe eventually." She studied him for a long moment, some calculation happening behind her eyes. Then she nodded once and returned to her meal. Later, after the dishes were washed and put away, Catherine hung her privacy blanket and changed for bed. Garrett stepped outside to give her space, sitting on the porch steps and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch settled into evening rhythms around him. Lamps were lit in the windows. Voices carried from the bunkhouse laughter and rough conversation. Somewhere a harmonica played a lonesome tune. This valley was beautiful in its way, the kind of place his father had dreamed of owning before everything fell apart. Good land, clean water, timber and grass as far as you could see. A man could build a real life here if he wasn't living it as a sentence. The cabin door creaked behind him. Catherine stepped out, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She sat beside him on the steps, not too close, maintaining the careful distance they'd established. "Marshal Hewitt is coming tomorrow," she said. "First weekly inspection." Garrett's stomach tightened. What will he look for? Evidence that we're actually living as husband and wife. That this isn't just a sham to keep you from hanging. She pulled the shawl tighter. "He'll ask questions. Look around the cabin. Try to catch us in a lie. What do? We convince him it's real." Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the shawl. "We share the same space, sleep in the same room, answer his questions the same way, make it believable. And if he doesn't believe us?" She didn't answer right away. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then you hang, and I go to the reformatory in Yuma. My father wins either way." They sat in silence, the weight of tomorrow pressing down. Everything hinged on their ability to pretend, to perform a marriage neither of them wanted. One mistake, one inconsistency, and it would all fall apart. "We should practice," Catherine said finally. "Questions he might ask. We need to know about each other," Garrett nodded. It made sense, even if it felt strange. "All right. What do you want to know? When is your birthday?" "March 14th, yours." "October 2nd. She paused. "Where were you born?" "Small farm outside Billings. Nothing much. Just wheat fields and bad soil." He turned slightly to see her face in the starlight. "Where did you go to school?" "Boston. Miss Hartwell's Academy for Young Ladies." 4 years of learning to be decorative and obedient. Bitterness crept into her voice. "Clearly I failed the obedient part." "Good." She blinked, surprised. "Good? The world has enough obedient people. Not enough who think for themselves." Catherine looked at him differently then, like she was seeing him for the first time, rather than just seeing the crime that brought him here. "My favorite color is green, the color of spring grass." "What's yours?" "Blue, sky blue, not ocean blue. The color right before sunset on clear days." They traded details like cards in a poker game, building a framework of false intimacy. Favorite foods, childhood memories, small habits and preferences. The kind of things a real married couple would know without thinking. Each answer revealed something true, even as they constructed something false. "What scares you most?" Catherine asked suddenly, going off script. Garrett considered lying, giving some surface answer. But exhaustion had worn down his defenses, and the darkness made confession easier. "Being trapped. Feeling like I can't breathe, can't move, can't get away. That's why I kept drifting. Every time I stayed somewhere too long, the walls started closing in. And now you're trapped for 5 years." "Yeah." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared of disappearing, of becoming invisible. My father wanted to marry me off to men who'd turn me into an ornament, something pretty to display at parties while they made all the decisions. I'd stop existing as myself and just become whoever's wife, whoever's property." She laughed softly without humor. "And now here I am anyway. Property after all, just belonging to a different kind of man. I don't want to own you, no. You just want to survive this. Same as me." They sat together as the night deepened, two people bound by force, learning each other's edges and boundaries. Not friends, not yet, but maybe something close to allies. Two prisoners in the same cell, figuring out how to share the space without destroying each other. When the cold finally drove them inside, they moved through their evening routine with practiced efficiency. Catherine behind her blanket, Garrett laying out his bedroll by the stove. The cabin settled into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of banked coals. "Garrett?" Catherine's voice came soft from the bed. "Yeah? Thank you. For trying to make this work, for not making it harder than it has to be." He didn't know what to say to that. Gratitude felt strange between them, unearned somehow. He was just surviving, same as her. "Get some sleep, Catherine. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Every day is going to be difficult, yeah. But we'll figure it out." He wasn't sure he believed it, but saying it out loud made it feel possible. They'd survived the first day, then the second. Maybe they could survive all the days after, until 5 years passed and freedom came back around. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and wild. Garrett closed his eyes and tried not to think about the open road, the freedom he'd lost, the life he'd never get back. Instead, he thought about tomorrow. The marshal's inspection, the questions they'd have to answer, the performance they'd have to give to stay alive, one day at a time. That was all he could manage. One day of this new life, stacked on top of another, building towards some distant future where maybe, just maybe, he'd be free again if he survived that long. Marshal Hewitt arrived exactly at noon, riding a dappled grey mare with a Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard. He was a compact man in his 50s, with steel grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. Garrett watched him approach from the corral where he'd been mending fence posts, his gut tight with tension. Catherine emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been baking bread all morning, filling the small space with yeast and warmth, making it look lived in, making it look real. "Mrs. Webb," Hewitt tipped his hat, his voice professionally neutral. "Mr. Webb, I'm here for the first inspection as ordered by Judge Ashford." "Of course, Marshal." Catherine's voice carried just the right note of courtesy without warmth. "Would you like to come inside?" Hewitt dismounted and followed them into the cabin, his sharp eyes cataloguing every detail. The single bed with its rumpled quilts, the 2 coffee cups on the table, Garrett's bedroll, conspicuously absent because they'd hidden it in the storage room that morning. Catherine's dresses hanging on pegs beside Garrett's spare shirt, all the small props of a shared life. The marshal walked slowly through the space, opening cupboards, checking the stove, even peering into the storage room, looking for cracks in their story, looking for proof that this was all a performance. "How are you finding married life?" he asked, turning suddenly to face Garrett. "It's an adjustment." "I imagine so." "Going from the open trail to domestic responsibility." Hewitt's expression revealed nothing. "And you, Mrs. Webb? How are you managing being married to a convicted criminal?" Catherine's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "My husband made mistakes. He's working to make amends. That's all anyone can ask. Noble of you." The marshal moved to the window, looking out at the ranch. "Judge Ashford wants to ensure this arrangement is legitimate, that you're both fulfilling your obligations. Tell me, where does your husband sleep?" The question hung in the air like a noose. Catherine didn't hesitate. "In our bed, Marshal. Where else would a husband sleep?" "Some arrangements of this nature are more practical rather than intimate. Our arrangement is our business." Catherine's voice cooled several degrees. "Unless the law requires us to provide proof of consummation, I believe our sleeping arrangements are private." Hewitt's mouth twitched, something between amusement and approval. "Fair enough. And Mr. Webb, are you being treated fairly here? Fed properly? Given adequate work?" Garrett met the marshal's eyes directly. "I'm treated fine. I work the ranch like any other hand. No complaints, really. Not even about being forced into marriage to avoid hanging? Would complaining change anything?" "No," Hewitt admitted, "but it might tell me whether you're planning to run at the first chance you get." "I gave my word that I'd stay 5 years. I keep my word, even when your word was coerced." Garrett felt Catherine tense beside him, but he kept his voice level. "Especially then. I made a choice. Now I live with it. The marshal studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll file my report with the judge. You'll see me again next week, same time. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you both seem to be making the best of a bad situation. Keep at it. After Hewitt rode away, Catherine sagged against the table, exhaling shakily. He knew about the bedroll, about everything. He was testing us. We passed, this time. But there'll be more tests, more inspections, more chances to slip up. She pressed her hands to her face. This is exhausting. Garrett moved to the window, watching the marshal's figure disappear toward the main house. We just have to be consistent. Keep the story straight. Eventually, they'll stop watching so closely. Or eventually we'll make a mistake and it'll all fall apart. Before Garrett could respond, shouting erupted from the direction of the horse pasture. He was out the door in seconds, Catherine behind him. 3 ranch hands stood at the fence, pointing at something in the far corner of the field. Marcus ran up, breathing hard. Fire! A lightning strike hit the old hay barn. It's going up fast. Garrett could see smoke now, black and thick, rising beyond the tree line. The hay barn sat near the forest edge, full of winter feed. If it spread to the trees, the whole mountainside could burn. Get everyone, Garrett ordered, already running. Buckets, shovels, anything that holds water. Move. The next 2 hours were chaos. Ranch hands formed bucket brigades from the creek, throwing water on flames that seemed to grow faster than they could fight them. Garrett and Marcus led teams beating back spot fires with wet sacks, trying to create fire breaks before the blaze reached the timber. The heat was brutal, stealing breath and sight. Smoke filled Garrett's lungs until he couldn't stop coughing. His hands blistered from the shovel handle, his clothes soaked with sweat and creek water. But he kept moving, kept fighting, because stopping meant losing the barn and possibly the ranch. Catherine appeared beside him with a bucket, her face streaked with soot, her dress scorched at the hem. "Tell me what to do. You shouldn't be here. Tell me what to do." He pointed to a line of flames creeping toward a stack of fence posts. "Wet everything in that direction. Don't let it spread." She ran without hesitation, throwing herself into the fight alongside ranch hands who'd sneered at her husband just days before. Garrett watched her work with fierce efficiency, never slowing, never complaining, proving she was tougher than any of them had given her credit for. By the time they finally contained the blaze, the sun hung low and angry red through the smoke. The hay barn was a total loss, nothing but blackened timbers and ash. But they'd saved the forest, saved the other buildings, saved the winter feed stored in the main barn. Garrett collapsed against a water trough, his body screaming exhaustion. Marcus dropped beside him, coughing hard, his face black with soot. "Never seen anyone fight fire like that on their first try," the older man said between coughs. "You've done this before." "Colorado. 3 summers ago. Wildfire took out half a valley. I was working at a ranch nearby." Garrett drank from the trough, not caring how it looked. "Lost 2 men in that one. We were lucky today. No one was hurt bad." Marcus looked toward where Catherine sat with some of the other hands, all of them exhausted and filthy. "Your wife surprised people. She's got a spine." "Yeah, she does." That night, after they'd both scrubbed the worst of the soot away in the cold creek, Catherine and Garrett sat on the cabin steps, too tired to move further. Every muscle ached. Their hands were blistered and raw, but they'd survived. "Thank you," Catherine said quietly, "for letting me help, for not trying to protect me from it. You didn't need protection." "No, but most men would have tried anyway." She flexed her damaged hands gingerly. "My father certainly would have. He thinks I'm made of porcelain, something pretty and fragile that might break if handled roughly." "You're not fragile?" She smiled faintly. "No, I'm really not." The week that followed brought new challenges, each one different from the last. On Tuesday, a mare went into difficult labor in the middle of the night. Garrett woke to frantic knocking and ran to the stable to find Marcus and the veterinarian struggling with a breech birth. For 3 hours they worked in lantern light, Garrett holding the mare's head and talking her through contractions while the vet manipulated the foal into position. When the colt finally slid free, sticky and trembling, relief flooded through everyone present. Catherine appeared with coffee and food around dawn, having apparently been awakened by the commotion. She stayed to help clean and feed the exhausted mare, crooning soft words while the new colt nursed for the first time. Garrett watched her gentle hands on the horse's neck and felt something shift in his chest. Respect, maybe, or recognition of someone who understood that life, any life, mattered. On Thursday, a summer storm rolled through with violent winds that tore shingles from the cabin roof. Rain poured through gaps, soaking everything. They spent the afternoon hauling furniture and belongings to dry corners while water pooled on the floor. "This is ridiculous," Catherine muttered, wringing out a soaked quilt. "We need to fix this now, or everything we own will be ruined. In this wind, we'll get blown off the roof. Then we'll hold on tight." They climbed up together, slipping on wet shingles, fighting the wind that tried to tear them off balance. Garrett hammered replacement shingles while Catherine braced him, both of them soaked to the bone and laughing at the absurdity of it. When they finally climbed down, the roof was patched and they were both shivering but victorious. "You're insane," Garrett told her. "So are you." Catherine grinned, looking younger than he'd ever seen her. "But at least we're dry now." Friday brought a different kind of trial. Danny, the red-haired ranch hand who'd challenged Garrett that first morning, got drunk in town and came back looking for trouble. He found Garrett in the barn and started running his mouth about Catherine, calling her names that made Garrett's blood boil. "Take it back," Garrett said quietly, setting down the harness he'd been mending. "Or what? You'll steal another horse and run away?" Danny sneered, emboldened by whiskey. "Everyone knows this marriage is a joke. The judge's precious daughter stuck with a worthless thief. She probably cries herself to sleep every night." Garrett moved before thinking, his fist connecting with Danny's jaw. The kid went down hard, then came up swinging. They fought in the barn aisle, brutal and graceless, fueled by weeks of tension and resentment. Garrett took a hard shot to the ribs, tasted blood, but kept coming. Marcus and two others finally pulled them apart. Danny spat blood and glared hatred. Garrett breathed hard. His knuckles split but met the kid's eyes without backing down. "You want to say something about my wife? You say it to me first," Garrett said clearly. "Every time. Understand?" Danny looked like he wanted to spit more than blood, but Marcus's grip on his shoulder tightened. Finally, the kid nodded and stumbled away. Later, Catherine found Garrett by the creek, cleaning his split knuckles. She sat beside him without speaking, took his damaged hand in hers, and examined the wounds with gentle fingers. "Danny's an idiot," she said finally. "Yeah. You didn't have to defend my honor. I've heard worse than whatever he said, I know. But he said it to hurt you. That's different." Catherine looked at him, something complicated moving behind her eyes. "You surprise me, Garrett Webb. Every day you surprise me a little more." She pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket and wrapped it carefully around his knuckles, her touch light and precise. The gesture felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with the marriage performance they'd been putting on for the marshal. "We should get back," she said, but didn't move. Yeah. They sat together as the creek murmured past and the evening settled around them. Something had changed between them over the week, transformed through shared crises and small moments of understanding. They still weren't friends exactly, but they weren't quite enemies anymore either. Saturday afternoon, Catherine was reviewing accounts on the porch when she made a small sound of discovery. Garrett looked up from oiling his saddle. "What is it?" "I found where the money's going. The discrepancies I noticed." She held up the ledger, triumph and anger mixing in her expression. "Someone's been doctoring the books for over a year, buying supplies through fake vendors and pocketing the difference. Who? I'm not sure yet. But it's someone with access to my father's accounts. Someone he trusts." She closed the book. "I need to tell him. Do you?" Catherine hesitated. "If I don't, it's theft." "If I do," she trailed off, clearly torn. "If you do, he might actually listen. Might see you as useful instead of just difficult." Garrett set down the saddle. "Or he might ignore you, and nothing changes anyway. You think I shouldn't tell him. I think you should do whatever feels right. Not what he wants, not what's expected. What feels right to you." She studied him for a long moment. "When did you become wise?" "I'm not wise, just tired of living for other people's expectations." That evening, Catherine walked to the main house alone, ledgers under her arm. Garrett watched her go, straight-backed and determined, and felt something that might have been pride. She returned an hour later, her face unreadable. Garrett waited on the porch, trying not to look anxious. "He listened," she said, sinking into the chair beside him. "Actually, I listened. Said he'd investigate." She laughed softly. "Then he asked if I'd continue managing the accounts. Said I had a head for numbers. That's good, right? I suppose. It's the most he's acknowledged me as capable of anything in years." She looked at Garrett. "He also asked how you were working out. If you were causing problems." Garrett's stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you work hard, follow orders, and haven't given anyone reason to complain." She smiled slightly. "Except Danny, but I left that part out. Generous of you. Well, you were defending my honor. Seemed unfair to get you in trouble for it." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead. A week had passed since the marshal's first inspection. 7 days of crisis and cooperation, of learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, of building something that felt almost like partnership. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship yet. But it was real in a way their forced wedding vows had never been. Built through fire and exhaustion, through standing together when everything tried to pull them apart. Inside the cabin that night, Catherine paused before hanging her privacy blanket. "Garrett, yeah, I'm glad you chose to live instead of the rope." She met his eyes across the small room. "I know that sounds strange, given everything. But I'm glad you're here." His throat tightened. "I'm glad you're here, too. Even if we both wish we weren't," she smiled, sad and genuine. "Even if we both wish we weren't." That night, Garrett lay on his bedroll and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the week that had passed. How quickly impossible things became routine. How people could surprise you when circumstances forced them to show who they really were beneath the armor. Catherine Ashford wasn't the pampered princess he'd assumed. She was strong and stubborn and brave in ways that had nothing to do with the privileges she'd been born into. And he was starting to realize that 5 years might be survivable after all. Not because the cage had gotten bigger, but because he wasn't facing it alone anymore. They were learning to be partners, allies, maybe eventually something more. But for now, partnership was enough. More than enough. Outside, the valley settled into night, patient and watching. Testing them both day by day, trial by trial. Seeing if they would break or bend, or somehow find a way to thrive, despite everything working against them. The answer remained uncertain. But with each challenge they faced together, the possibility of survival grew stronger. And survival, Garrett was learning, was just the beginning. 3 weeks into their arrangement, autumn arrived with sudden violence. The temperature dropped overnight, frost coating the grass in silver sheets. Garrett woke shivering, his breath visible in the cold cabin air. The stove had gone out during the night, and morning light filtered through windows rimmed with ice. He rebuilt the fire quickly, coaxing flames from kindling until heat began to fill the small space. Catherine stirred in the bed, pulling quilts tighter around herself before sitting up, hair loose around her shoulders. "It's freezing," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "First hard freeze. Winter's coming early this year." Garrett fed larger wood into the stove. "We'll need more firewood. A lot more." They spent the morning cutting and stacking wood from the deadfall markers had marked in the forest. Hard work that left them both sweating despite the cold. By afternoon, they'd built a respectable woodpile against the cabin wall, enough to last a few weeks if they were careful. Catherine went inside to start dinner while Garrett finished securing the stack. He was reaching for the last log when he heard the scream. He burst through the door to find Catherine backed against the far wall, her face white with terror. On the floor between them, coiled and rattling, was the biggest timber rattlesnake he'd ever seen. 4 feet long at least, thick as his wrist, its triangular head raised and tracking Catherine's every movement. "Don't move," Garrett said, his voice low and steady despite his racing heart. Stay absolutely still. The snake's rattle intensified, a dry buzzing that filled the cabin with menace. It was trapped between Catherine and the door, feeling cornered, ready to strike at anything that threatened it. One bite from a snake that size could kill, especially if the venom hit a major blood vessel. Garrett's eyes swept the cabin for options. His rifle leaned against the wall near the bed, too far to reach quickly. A poker stood by the stove, but getting to it meant moving toward the snake. Catherine's eyes locked on his, wide with fear, but trusting him to know what to do. "When I move, you run for the door," he said quietly. "Don't hesitate. Just run. Garrett, no." On 3, 1, the snake shifted, its body coiling tighter, preparing to strike. 2, Garrett grabbed the iron poker from beside the stove. 3, he lunged forward, swinging the poker down hard. The snake struck at the same moment, lightning fast. Garrett felt fangs pierce his left forearm, burning pain lancing up toward his shoulder. But his blow connected, pinning the snake's head to the floor. He brought the poker down again and again, until the rattling finally stopped. Catherine was at his side instantly, her hands shaking as she grabbed his arm. 2 puncture wounds welled blood just below his elbow, already swelling around the edges. "Oh God, oh God!" "Garrett, get my knife." His voice came out steady despite the fire spreading through his arm. "We need to cut the wound, get the venom out." She ran for his saddlebag, dumping contents until she found the knife. Her hands trembled as she handed it to him. "I can't," she whispered. "I'll hurt you worse. You have to." Garrett's vision was already starting to blur at the edges. "Cut across the punctures, shallow. Then suck out as much as you can. Spit it out, don't swallow." Catherine took the knife, her face set with determination despite her terror. The blade was sharp and her cuts were quick and clean. Garrett gritted his teeth against the pain, watching her lean down and press her mouth to the wound. She drew hard, pulling venom and blood, spitting red into a bucket over and over. Her lips would be numb soon, tingling from venom contact, but she didn't stop, didn't hesitate, just kept working with fierce concentration. "Enough," Garrett finally managed. "That's enough." She tore strips from her petticoat, wrapping his arm tight to slow the venom's spread. Her hands left bloody prints on the white fabric. Tears streaked her face, though she didn't seem to notice. "We need to get you to town. To a doctor. No time!" His legs were already weakening, the venom working through his system. "Need to. Lie down." Catherine helped him to the bed, her strength surprising as she supported his weight. She propped him up with pillows, keeping his arm elevated and still. His body started to shake, shock and venom combining into something that felt like death approaching in slow motion. "I'm getting help," she said, standing. Garrett grabbed her hand with his good arm, holding tight. "No, can't leave me. If I start convulsing, choking," the truth hung between them. She was the only thing standing between him and death. Leaving meant he might not make it. Staying meant watching him suffer, possibly die, with no way to help beyond what she'd already done. Catherine's jaw set. "Then I'm staying." The next hours blurred together in fever and pain. Garrett's arm swelled to twice its normal size, the skin tight and discolored. His body alternated between burning heat and violent chills. Catherine stayed beside him the entire time, changing the bandages, forcing water past his cracked lips, holding him steady when convulsions hit. She talked to him constantly, her voice anchoring him when fever tried to pull him under completely. She told him about her childhood, about her mother who died when Catherine was 12, about the books she'd read and the places she wanted to see. Stories to keep him tethered to consciousness, to give him something to focus on, besides the poison burning through his veins. "Stay with me," she whispered during the worst moments. "Don't you dare leave me alone in this, Garrett Webb. Don't you dare." Night fell. Catherine lit lamps and kept the stove burning. She didn't eat, didn't rest, just maintained her vigil with a determination that would have moved him if he'd been capable of feeling anything beyond agony. Sometime past midnight, his fever peaked. Garrett thrashed in the bed, lost in nightmares, where snakes became ropes, became chains that wrapped around his throat. Catherine held him down, kept him from hurting himself, her voice cutting through the delirium. You're Garrett Andrew Webb. You're 23 years old. Your favorite color is sky blue. You're here with me in Timber Ridge, and you're going to survive this. Do you hear me? You're going to survive." He tried to respond, but words wouldn't come. His body felt like it was tearing apart from the inside, every nerve screaming. Death would be easier, quieter, just letting go and sinking into the darkness that kept pulling at him. But Catherine's hands held firm. Her voice stayed steady. She wouldn't let him go. Dawn broke grey and cold. Garrett's fever finally began to break, the worst of the crisis passing. He opened his eyes to find Catherine still beside him, exhausted beyond measure, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her dress stained with his blood. But her eyes burned with triumph. "You're still here," she said, her voice cracking. "You stubborn, impossible man. You're still here." He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. She lifted a cup of water to his lips, supporting his head with gentle hands. The water tasted like life itself. "How long?" He managed. 18 hours. Catherine set down the cup, her hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. "I thought I'd lost you 3 different times. Your heart stopped twice. I had to—" Her voice broke completely. "I couldn't lose you. I couldn't." Something in her eyes made Garrett's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with venom. She wasn't just relieved he'd survived. She'd been terrified of losing him specifically. Not just the arrangement, not just the protection from her father, him. Catherine, the cabin door burst open. Judge Ashford strode in, Marshal Hewitt behind him, both men taking in the scene with sharp eyes. The dead snake still lay near the door. Blood stained the floor. Catherine looked like she'd been through a war. "What happened here?" the judge demanded. Catherine stood, placing herself between Garrett and her father. "Rattlesnake got into the cabin? Bit Garrett while he was protecting me. I've been treating him. Alone? For how long?" "Since yesterday afternoon." Judge Ashford's eyes narrowed. "You should have sent for help immediately." "A doctor, there wasn't time." Catherine's voice carried steel underneath the exhaustion. "Moving him would have killed him. I did what needed to be done." Marshal Hewitt moved to examine the snake, then Garrett's arm. The swelling had started to subside, but the limb was still badly discolored, the bite marks angry and infected-looking. "You saved his life," Hewitt said to Catherine. "Most people wouldn't have known what to do, or had the stomach for it." "Most people aren't married to him," Catherine replied quietly. The judge studied his daughter with an expression Garrett couldn't quite read, something between surprise and grudging respect. "Nevertheless, he needs proper medical attention. I'll send Dr. Morrison from town." "Thank you, Father." Ashford looked at Garrett, then really looked at him for the first time since entering. "You put yourself between my daughter and a rattlesnake." It wasn't a question, but Garrett answered anyway. "Yes, sir." "Judge Ashford, that was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." The corner of the judge's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Marshal, note in your report that the arrangement appears to be proceeding satisfactorily. Mr. Webb is fulfilling his obligations." After they left, Catherine sagged into the chair beside the bed, all her strength finally giving out. Garrett reached for her hand with his good arm, and she clutched it like a lifeline. "You should rest," he said. "So should you. I've been unconscious for 18 hours. "That's basically rest," she laughed, the sound cracking into something between humor and tears. "Don't joke. Not about this. I really thought you were going to die, Garrett. I thought I'd have to watch you die and there'd be nothing I could do to stop it. But I didn't, because of you." He squeezed her hand gently. "You saved my life, Catherine. You saved mine first. From the snake, then we're even." "No." She met his eyes, and Garrett saw something there that stole his breath, something raw and true and terrifying in its honesty. "We're not even. We'll never be even. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I stopped seeing you as the criminal my father forced me to marry. And I can't unsee it. I can't go back to that." The words hung between them, changing everything. This wasn't about survival anymore, about maintaining appearances or serving their sentences. Something real had grown between them, built through crisis and care, through seeing each other stripped down to essentials. "Catherine, don't." She pulled her hand back, standing abruptly. "Don't say anything. I shouldn't have said that. I'm just tired and emotional and not thinking clearly." She moved to the stove, busying herself with unnecessary tasks, her back rigid with tension. Garrett watched her, his heart pounding despite his weakened state. He'd felt it too. The shift. The moment when she stopped being the judge's daughter and became just Catherine. When her laugh became something he wanted to hear. When protecting her became instinct rather than obligation. It terrified him more than the snakebite had, because caring meant vulnerability. It meant having something to lose. And Garrett had spent 7 years making sure he never had anything worth losing. But as he watched Catherine move around the cabin, still taking care of him even in her exhaustion, he realized it was too late. He already cared. I already had something to lose, and that changed everything. Dr. Morrison arrived that evening, a gruff old man with competent hands. He cleaned and redressed the wound, left powders for pain and infection, and pronounced Garrett lucky to be alive. "Your wife knows her medicine," he told Garrett. "Most people panic and make it worse. She kept her head and did everything right. You're fortunate in your choice of bride." After the doctor left, Catherine made soup from supplies Mrs. Palmer had sent over. She fed Garrett carefully, her touch gentle but impersonal, maintaining distance. They didn't speak about what she'd said earlier, didn't acknowledge the thing growing between them that neither was ready to name. That night, Catherine started to hang her privacy blanket, but Garrett stopped her. "Don't," he said quietly. "I mean, you should sleep. Really sleep. You haven't rested in almost 2 days. I'm fine on the floor." "Catherine, take the bed, please." She hesitated, then nodded. But instead of claiming the whole bed, she lay down on one side, leaving space. "Your arm needs to stay elevated. You should sleep here, too, where I can keep watch in case the fever returns." It made practical sense. But they both knew it was more than that. Garrett carefully positioned himself on the other side, his injured arm propped on pillows between them. They lay in the darkness, not touching but aware of every breath, every small movement. "Garrett." Catherine's voice came soft in the dark. "Yeah? I meant what I said earlier, about seeing you differently. I know it complicates things, but I wanted you to know. You're not just the arrangement anymore. You're—" She trailed off, but Garrett knew what she couldn't say, because he felt it too. The impossible thing that had grown, despite every reason it shouldn't, despite being forced together, despite the cage around them both. "I know," he said quietly. "I see you too, Catherine. The real you. And it scares me. Why? Because in 4.5 years, I'm supposed to walk away. That was the deal. Freedom after 5 years. His voice roughened. "I don't know if I can walk away anymore." Silence stretched between them, heavy with truth and fear and possibility. Finally, Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers lacing through his. "Then we figure it out together, whatever comes." "Together," Garrett agreed. They fell asleep that way, hands clasped, hearts tangled in something neither had planned on or wanted but couldn't deny anymore. Outside, the valley settled under stars, patient and knowing, testing them still but in different ways now. Seeing if what they'd built could survive not just a crisis, but the harder test of genuine feeling. The answer remained uncertain. But for the first time since that day in the courthouse, neither of them was facing it alone. Garrett's arm healed slowly over the next 2 weeks, leaving angry scars that would mark him forever. But something else had healed faster, the distance between him and Catherine. They moved around each other differently now, with an ease that came from genuine connection rather than forced proximity. Small touches that lingered, conversations that stretched late into the night, laughter that felt natural instead of strange. The ranch hands noticed, Mrs. Palmer noticed. Even Marcus commented on how the tension that had followed them everywhere seemed to have lifted, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. Marshall Hewitt's weekly visits became routine, his questions less probing as the weeks passed. By the 6th inspection, he barely glanced around the cabin before tipping his hat and riding away. The performance had become reality, and everyone could see it, everyone except Judge Ashford. The summons came on a cold November morning, A ranch hand delivered it to the cabin, a formal note requesting Garrett and Catherine's presence at the main house for dinner that evening. Not invited, summoned. The distinction was clear. "He wants something," Catherine said, staring at the note with suspicion. "My father never invites anyone to dinner without a reason. Maybe he just wants to check on us. My father doesn't check on anyone out of concern. He checks on investments." She folded the note precisely, her movements sharp with tension. "Whatever this is, be careful. He's planning something." That evening they walked to the main house under a sky heavy with unfallen snow. Catherine wore her best dress, deep burgundy with black lace at the collar. Garrett had borrowed a proper coat from Marcus, uncomfortable in its formality, but knowing appearances mattered tonight. Judge Ashford greeted them in the parlor, a crystal glass of brandy in hand. But he wasn't alone. 3 men sat in leather chairs, all dressed in expensive suits, all radiating the kind of confidence that came from old money and political power. "Catherine, Mr. Webb, allow me to introduce some colleagues." The judge gestured to each man in turn. "Senator Harrison from Helena. Robert Blackwell, who owns the largest mining operation in the territory. And his son, James Blackwell." James Blackwell stood as Catherine entered, his smile practiced and predatory. He was handsome in a polished way, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that assessed Catherine like she was horseflesh at auction. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Miss Catherine," James said, moving forward to take her hand. "I've heard so much about you. Your father speaks of your intelligence and beauty constantly." "It's Mrs. Webb now," Catherine said coolly, pulling her hand back. "And yes, we've met before. You proposed marriage to me 2 years ago at the governor's ball." "Ah, yes. You turned me down quite decisively, as I recall." James's smile didn't falter. "Though your circumstances have changed considerably since then." The insult hung in the air. Garrett moved closer to Catherine, his presence a silent statement. Judge Ashford watched the interaction with calculating eyes. "Gentlemen, shall we move to the dining room?" Ashford suggested smoothly. Dinner was an exercise in barely concealed hostility. The senator and Robert Blackwell discussed territorial politics and business ventures, while Judge Ashford played the gracious host. James sat across from Catherine, his attention fixed on her in a way that made Garrett's blood simmer. "So tell me, Mrs. Webb," James said, cutting into his venison, "how are you finding married life on the frontier? Quite different from Boston society, I imagine." "I find it suits me," Catherine replied evenly. "There's more honesty in hard work than in ballroom politeness." "Honesty?" James laughed. "Is that what you call this arrangement? Your father told us the whole story. The horse thief was given a choice between hanging and marriage." "Very romantic." Garrett's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Catherine's face remained composed, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "James," Robert Blackwell warned quietly. "What?" "I'm simply pointing out reality. Miss Catherine, forgive me, Mrs. Webb, married a criminal to avoid her father's matchmaking, and now she's stuck playing house in a cabin with a man who should be 6 feet under." James leaned forward. "But arrangements can be dissolved, especially when one party violates the terms." Judge Ashford's voice cut through the tension. "My daughter's marriage is quite legal and binding, Mr. Blackwell. I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that Catherine deserves better." "That she always did." James's eyes locked on her. "My proposal still stands, Catherine. I can offer you the life you were meant for. Wealth, position, respect. Not this existence you've been reduced to." "I chose this existence," Catherine said, her voice carrying steel underneath the courtesy. "And I choose to stay in it." "Do you?" James turned to Garrett. "What about you, Mr. Webb? Does my offer interest you at all?" "What offer?" Garrett asked carefully. $5,000. Enough to start over anywhere you want. New territory, new name, complete freedom." James smiled. "All you have to do is leave. Violate the terms of your arrangement. Let Catherine return to the life she deserves instead of wasting away in a foreman's cabin." The room went silent. Even the senator and Robert Blackwell looked uncomfortable now, realizing how far James was willing to go. Garrett set down his fork slowly, his eyes never leaving James's face. "Let me make sure I understand. You're offering me money to abandon my wife and break my word. I'm offering you freedom. Real freedom, not some promise 5 years away. James leaned back confidently. You didn't choose this marriage. You were coerced into it. No one would blame you for taking a better option when it presented itself. I would blame him, Catherine said quietly. James turned to her. Catherine, be reasonable. This man is a criminal. He has no education, no prospects, no future beyond what your father forced on him. You're throwing away your life out of stubbornness. That's enough. Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know anything about my husband. You don't know his character, his integrity, or what we've built together. You see a criminal because that's all you want to see. And what do you see? James challenged, standing as well. I see a man who put himself between me and a rattlesnake, who works harder than anyone on this ranch, who keeps his word even when it costs him everything. Catherine's eyes blazed. I see someone who chose life when death would have been easier, someone who treats me as an equal instead of property. That's worth more than all your money and position combined. The words hung in the room like a declaration of war. Judge Ashford's knuckles were white around his brandy glass. James Blackwell's practiced smile had finally cracked, showing anger underneath. You've made your choice clear, James said coldly. I hope you don't regret it when reality sets in. The only thing I regret, Catherine replied, is that I wasted 2 years being polite to you. She turned to Garrett. We're leaving. Garrett stood, his arm still aching from the snakebite, but his resolve solid as stone. He looked at James Blackwell, then at Judge Ashford, memorizing their faces so he'd never forget who had tried to buy him. For the record, Garrett said quietly, $5,000 isn't enough. 10,000 wouldn't be enough. There's no amount of money that would make me walk away from my wife. Not because of the arrangement, because she's worth more than anything you could offer. He took Catherine's hand, feeling her fingers grip his tightly, and they walked out together. No one tried to stop them. Outside, the first snow of winter had started falling, soft flakes drifting through lamplight. Catherine walked fast, her breath coming in angry puffs of vapor. Garrett kept pace beside her, his mind racing. He set that up, Catherine said when they were halfway back to the cabin. My father. He invited them here specifically to test us, to see if you could be bought. Why? The arrangement is working. Marshal Hewitt says so in every report. Because it's working too well. Catherine stopped walking, turning to face him. Snow caught in her hair, melting against her flushed cheeks. He wanted to break me with this marriage, force me to see what defiance costs. But instead She trailed off, looking lost. Instead, you're what? Happy, she whispered.
I'm happy, Garrett.
In this impossible situation my father created to punish me, I found something real, and he can't stand it. So he's trying to destroy it. Garrett pulled her close, feeling her shaking against him. Not from cold, but from anger and fear, and the weight of what they'd just faced together. He can't destroy us, not unless we let him. He's the judge. He has power over the law, over the land, over a lot of things. Garrett tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. But not over this, not over what we choose. Catherine's eyes searched his face. You really meant what you said in there?
About the money?
Every word. Why? You could have taken it, disappeared, been free of all this, because somewhere between hating this arrangement and now, I stopped wanting to be free of it. His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away a melted snowflake. I stopped wanting to be free of you. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, her hands fisting in his coat. Garrett wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. This wasn't part of the performance. This wasn't for the marshal or the judge or anyone but them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine pressed her forehead to his. This is going to get worse, she said. My father won't stop. He'll keep testing, keep pushing, keep trying to break us apart. Then we keep standing together. Keep proving him wrong. Garrett's voice was steady, certain. We've survived everything else. We'll survive him too. They walked the rest of the way in silence, hands clasped, snow falling around them like a benediction. Inside the cabin, Catherine built up the fire while Garrett lit lamps. both of them moving in the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over weeks of sharing space. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. The external threat had returned, stronger and more personal than before. And they'd faced it down together, made their choice clear for everyone to see. Garrett? Catherine said from where she stood by the fire, her face half in shadow. Yeah. When I said I was happy, I meant it, despite everything. Despite how this started. She turned to face him fully. These last few weeks with you have been the freest I've ever felt. Even though we're both trapped, he moved to her, closing the distance between them. I know what you mean. I've spent 7 years running from anything that felt like a cage. But this, he gestured at the small cabin, at the life they'd built. This doesn't feel like prison anymore. What does it feel like? Home, he said simply. It feels like home. Catherine's eyes shone with tears. She refused to let fall. My father is going to try everything to destroy this. You know that, right? The money was just the first move. There'll be others. Let him try. Garrett's jaw set with determination. We've got 4.5 years left on this arrangement. That's a long time to prove we're stronger than anything he throws at us. And after? After 5 years when you're free to go. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been brave enough to voice until now. Garrett took her hands in his, feeling calluses that matched his own, evidence of shared work and survival. Ask me again in 4.5 years, he said quietly. But Catherine, I don't think I'm going anywhere. She smiled then, genuine and bright despite the tears. Good, because I don't want you to. That night they lay together in the narrow bed, no privacy blanket between them, no pretense of distance. Catherine's head rested on Garrett's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her, her hand over his heart. Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the valley in white silence. Do you think we're crazy? Catherine whispered. Falling for each other when we were forced together? When everything about this was designed to make us miserable? Probably, Garrett admitted. But I'd rather be crazy with you than sane without you. She laughed softly, the sound vibrating against his chest. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Give me time. I'm new at this. You're doing fine. Catherine's fingers traced idle patterns over his heartbeat. Better than fine. They fell into comfortable silence, but Garrett's mind kept returning to the dinner, to James Blackwell's offer, to the judge's calculating eyes. The threat wasn't over. It had only just begun. And next time it might not be money. It might be something worse, but as Catherine's breathing deepened into sleep, her trust absolute in his arms, Garrett made himself a promise. Whatever came next, whatever the judge threw at them, he would protect this. Protect her. Protect what they'd built from the ashes of a forced marriage, because it wasn't forced anymore. It was chosen. Fully, completely chosen by both of them. And that made all the difference. Outside, the valley lay quiet under fresh snow, waiting and watching. The trial wasn't over. The judge's machinations would continue. But tonight, in a small cabin at the edge of the property, 2 people who'd been thrown together as punishment had found something worth fighting for. Love built on survival. Partnership forged through crisis. A future neither had planned, but both were beginning to believe in. The storm was coming. They both knew it, but they would weather it together. And that would have to be enough. Winter settled over Timber Ridge with brutal efficiency. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the basin overnight. Garrett and Catherine learned to sleep close for warmth, their bodies fitting together like they'd been designed that way all along. What had started as survival became comfort, then something deeper that neither could quite name, but both recognized. The ranch slowed during winter months, but work never stopped completely. Livestock needed feeding, water needed hauling, equipment needed maintaining. Garrett worked alongside Marcus and the hands through freezing mornings and early darkness, coming home each night to lamplight and Catherine's smile and the kind of peace he'd never known existed. They'd been married 2 months when the second test came. Marshal Hewitt rode up on a gray, January morning, but this time Judge Ashford accompanied him. Both men wore expressions that warned of trouble. Garrett was chopping wood when he saw them approach. He set down the axe and moved to intercept them before they reached the cabin, giving Catherine time to prepare for whatever was coming. Marshal. Judge Ashford. Garrett kept his voice neutral. Mr. Webb. The judge dismounted, brushing snow from his coat. I need to speak with you and my daughter, inside. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her face composed but wary. Father, what brings you here? Official business. May we come in? They crowded into the small cabin, suddenly made smaller by the judge's presence. He surveyed the space with critical eyes, noting the shared bed, the domesticity of it all. His expression revealed nothing. I've received a letter from the territorial governor, Ashford began, pulling a document from his coat. There's been a complaint filed regarding your marriage. An accusation that it's fraudulent, arranged solely to circumvent justice. Catherine's face went pale. Who filed the complaint? The letter doesn't specify, but it requests a formal investigation. Marshal Hewitt will need to conduct a more thorough examination of your living situation and relationship. The judge's eyes moved between them. If the marriage is found to be a sham, the original sentence stands. Mr. Webb hangs, and you, Catherine, face charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice. The words landed like physical blows. Garrett felt Catherine sway beside him and reached for her hand instinctively. Her fingers gripped his with desperate strength. This is because I refused, James Blackwell, Catherine said, her voice shaking with fury. He couldn't buy Garrett, so he went to the governor. Your business partner, Judge Ashford's jaw tightened. The source of the complaint is irrelevant. What matters is the investigation will proceed. Marshal Hewitt begins interviews tomorrow. After they left, Catherine paced the cabin like a caged animal. Garrett watched her, his mind working through their options, finding them all lacking. We could run, she said suddenly. Take horses tonight, head for Canada. Disappear before they can, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Garrett shook his head. That's not living, Catherine. That's just a different kind of prison. She stopped pacing, her eyes fierce. Then what do we do? Let them interrogate us? Dig through our lives looking for proof we're lying? We tell the truth. He moved to her, taking her trembling hands. That this started as coercion, but became something real. That we chose each other even when we didn't have to. Will that be enough? It has to be. The investigation began in earnest the next day. Marshal Hewitt interviewed every ranch hand, asking pointed questions about Garrett and Catherine's behavior. Were they affectionate? Did they seem genuinely attached? Had anyone witnessed anything that suggested the marriage was false? Marcus told the marshal about the barn fire, how they'd fought side by side without hesitation. Mrs. Palmer described finding them after Garrett's snakebite. Catherine's exhaustion, proving she'd never left his side through the worst of it. Even Danny, who'd once challenged Garrett, admitted they seemed genuinely devoted. But testimony wasn't enough. On the third day, Hewitt pulled Garrett aside at the corral. I need you to be straight with me, Webb, the marshal said quietly. Is this marriage real or isn't it? Garrett met his eyes directly. It's real. That's not what I'm asking. I know you care about her. Anyone with eyes can see that. But did you marry her to escape hanging, or would you have chosen her anyway? The question cut deeper than expected. Garrett thought about those first days, the resentment and fear, the cage closing in. Then he thought about Catherine laughing in the rain, fighting fire with blistered hands, staying awake for 18 hours to save his life. Both, he said finally. I married her to survive, but I stayed married because I fell in love with who she is. And if I could go back to that courthouse, knowing everything that would happen, I'd still choose her. Every time, Hewitt studied him for a long moment, then nodded. That's what I needed to hear. That evening, Garrett found Catherine on the porch, despite the bitter cold, wrapped in quilts and staring at the mountains. He sat beside her, and she immediately leaned into his warmth. The marshal questioned me today, she said. Asked if you've ever hurt me. If I feel trapped. If I wanted to be rescued from this situation, what did you tell him? The truth. That the only person who ever made me feel trapped was my father. that you've never been anything but honest with me, even when honesty was hard." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I told him I've never felt more free than I do with you." Garrett's throat tightened. "Catherine, let me finish." She took his hands in hers. "When this investigation is over, whether we pass or fail, I want you to know something. If they decide this marriage is invalid, if they give you the choice again between hanging and something else, I'll stand beside you no matter what you choose. Even if that means running, even if it means losing everything, you'd give up your home for me?" "Home isn't a place, Garrett. I learned that these last 2 months. Home is wherever you are." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring everything he couldn't say into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not running, and you're not losing anything. We're going to get through this together, and then we're going to build the life we want. On our terms. Promise?" "Promise." 3 days later, Marshal Hewitt delivered his verdict. He arrived at sunset, his face unreadable as he dismounted. Garrett and Catherine stood together on the porch, hands clasped, ready to face whatever came. "I've completed my investigation," Hewitt said without preamble. "Interviewed 23 people, reviewed your living situation, examined the evidence." He pulled out his report. "My conclusion is that while your marriage began under unusual circumstances, it has evolved into a genuine partnership. The affection between you appears authentic, the commitment mutual. I'm recommending the complaint be dismissed." Catherine's knees buckled with relief. Garrett caught her, holding her upright as joy and disbelief crashed through them both. "However," Hewitt continued, his voice harder, "Judge Ashford wants to speak with you both. Tomorrow morning, main house. He has something to say about all this." After the marshal left, they stood in the gathering darkness, not quite trusting their reprieve. "It's over," Catherine whispered. "The investigation is over. One more test," Garrett said. "Whatever your father has planned, I don't care what he says, we won. We proved them all wrong, but that night neither could sleep." They lay together in the darkness, fingers intertwined, both wondering what final trial Judge Ashford had in store. Morning came cold and clear. They dressed carefully, preparing for battle one more time. The walk to the main house felt longer than usual, each step heavy with anticipation. Judge Ashford waited in his study, standing by the window with his back to them when they entered. He didn't turn immediately, letting silence stretch uncomfortable and taut. "I made a mistake," he said finally. His voice rough, Catherine and Garrett exchanged glances. Unsure they'd heard correctly, the judge turned to face them, and for the first time he looked old, tired. "When I arranged this marriage, I wanted to teach you both a lesson. You, Catherine, for defying me, and you, Webb, for thinking you could take what wasn't yours without consequences." He moved to his desk, pulling out a leather folder. "I wanted you to suffer, to understand the cost of your choices. Father," he held up a hand, stopping her, "but you didn't suffer, did you? You thrived. You built something I never expected, something I haven't seen since your mother was alive." His voice cracked slightly. "Genuine partnership, the kind that makes people stronger together than they ever were apart." He opened the folder, revealing legal documents. "The Northern Valley property, 200 acres as promised. But I'm not waiting 5 years." He pushed the papers across the desk. "The deed transfers today. To both of you. Joint ownership, no conditions." Garrett stared at the documents, unable to process what he was seeing. Catherine's hand found his, squeezing tight. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because I was wrong. The admission clearly cost him. I tried to break you both, and instead I gave you the foundation to build something real. Something lasting." He looked at Garrett directly. "You're not what I wanted for my daughter, but you're what she chose. And watching you these past months, I've come to understand she chose well." "Judge Ashford, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just take care of her. Keep being the man who fights fires and faces down snakes and refuses bribes because his word means something." Ashford's expression softened fractionally. That's all I ask. Catherine moved around the desk and embraced her father, both of them stiff with years of conflict but trying. Thank you, Father. When she stepped back, the judge cleared his throat roughly. There's one more thing. The foreman position. It's yours permanently, Webb, with an appropriate salary. You've earned it. They left the main house in a daze, the deed clutched in Catherine's hands, their future suddenly solid and real. Halfway back to the cabin, Garrett stopped walking. We own land, he said, the words sounding impossible. 200 acres. We do. Catherine laughed, the sound bright and free. We actually do. He swept her up, spinning her in a circle while she shrieked and laughed and held on to him. When he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like children. What do we do now? She asked. Now? Garrett looked toward the northern valley, seeing their future spread out before them. Now we start building. A house, a herd, a life that's completely ours. When do we start? Soon as the snow melts. We'll design it together, build it together. Make it perfect, Catherine's eyes shone. I want a big kitchen, and a library, and windows facing the mountains. Then that's what you'll have. All of it. They walked back to the cabin, talking about their plans, words tumbling over each other in excitement. For the first time since the courthouse, the future felt boundless rather than constrained, open rather than determined, theirs. That night, they spread the deed on the small table, tracing property lines by lamplight, dreaming out loud about what they'd create together. 4 more years until your sentence ends, Catherine said, her finger following the creek that ran through their property. Then you're completely free. Garrett pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. I'm already free, Catherine. Have been since the moment I stopped seeing this as punishment and started seeing it as a possibility. She twisted to face him, her expression serious. Do you ever regret it? Choosing to live instead of never? He didn't let her finish. Not once. Because choosing to live meant finding you, and you're worth every moment of uncertainty, every test, every trial, even the snakebite. Especially the snakebite. You saved my life, Catherine. In more ways than one. She kissed him softly, tenderly, a promise of everything to come. We should celebrate. Our land, our future, all of it. What did you have in mind? Her smile was mischievous. I heard there's a dance in town next Saturday. We could go, show everyone that the judge's daughter and the reluctant cowboy are doing just fine. A dance? Garrett groaned. I don't dance. You'll learn. I'll teach you. She stood, pulling him to his feet. Right now, actually. We'll practice. There in the small cabin with no music but her humming, Catherine taught Garrett to dance. He stepped on her toes twice, made her laugh 12 times, and somewhere in the swaying and stumbling, fell even more impossibly in love with her. The days that followed felt like emerging from a long tunnel into sunlight. The investigation was closed. The land was theirs. Judge Ashford had made an uneasy peace with their marriage. And slowly, the town itself began to accept them. At the dance the following Saturday, heads still turned when they entered. Whispers still followed them. But when Garrett led Catherine onto the floor, and they moved together with obvious affection, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. They weren't a scandal anymore. They were a story, the kind people would tell for years, about how love can grow in the strangest soil, about how second chances can change everything, about how the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to see them through. Marcus approached during a break between songs. You two look happy. We are, Catherine said simply. Good, you've earned it. Both of you. He nodded to Garrett. Spring roundup starts in 6 weeks. You'll lead it as a foreman. If you're ready, I'm ready. After Marcus walked away, Catherine squeezed Garrett's hand. You've come a long way from a horse thief facing the gallows. We both have. You're not the rebellious daughter anymore either. No, she smiled up at him. I'm the rebellious wife now. Much better. They danced until late, surrounded by people who judged them harshly but were slowly learning to accept what they'd built. When they finally walked home under brilliant and cold, their breath misting in the winter air, everything felt right in a way Garrett had never experienced. Inside the warm cabin, Catherine built up the fire while Garrett lit lamps. Their evening routine had become second nature, each knowing where the other would be, what they needed, how to move around each other in the limited space. "Garrett," Catherine said from where she stood by the bed. "Yeah? I'm glad you stole those horses," he laughed, surprised. "That's a strange thing to be glad about. If you hadn't, we never would have met. You wouldn't have been in that courtroom. My father wouldn't have forced us together." She moved to him, taking his hands. "I know it sounds crazy to be grateful for something that should have been terrible, but I can't imagine my life without you now. So yes, I'm glad you stole those horses." Garrett pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "For what it's worth, I'm glad your father was a controlling tyrant." She laughed against his chest. "We're both terrible people. Or we're people who learn to find good in bad situations. That sounds much more noble." They stood together in the quiet cabin, the fire crackling softly, snow beginning to fall outside. Just two people who'd been thrown together by force and circumstance, who'd survived tests that should have broken them, who'd built something real from the wreckage of coercion. "4 more years," Catherine whispered. "4 more years of this. Of us, of building our future." Garrett tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "And then forever after that." "Forever," she agreed. Outside, the valley settled into winter's grip, patient and knowing. The reluctant cowboy and the judge's defiant daughter had proven themselves strong enough to weather any storm. Their first touch had indeed set the quiet valley ablaze, not with scandal, but with something far more powerful, with love that chose itself, with a partnership that refused to break, with a future built on ashes that bloomed more beautiful than anyone could have imagined, and that fire would burn for the rest of their lives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.